It appears that the time of the chime is 2 p.m. We are out for recess, so everybody get off the merry-go-round and the monkey bars and come on back in here and let's do the work that we were supposed to do. All right. What we're going to do, folks, to give y'all a lay of the land and also to share with the fine folks from the administration that are here, we're going to go out of session, hear a 5-minute testimony from the folks from Open Records. We can ask any questions we would like of her. Then we are going to ask a few more questions to the administration's team. Then we will go back into session, talk amongst ourselves, and then decide the ultimate disposition of this bill as we have it here in front of us. Does that sound like good? I hope everybody likes that. Your benevolent dictator has decreed it so. All right. At this point in time, we're going to ask Ms. Deborah Fisher to approach. She had emailed me last evening, and so asking for some time today. I thought she had some reasonable points to make, so we are now going to hear from her, but guess what? We're out of session.
Hi there. Thank you. I'm Deborah Fisher. I'm the Executive Director of Tennessee Coalition for Open Government, which is an organization that's been around since 2003, tracking access to public records and open meetings and promoting the right to know of citizens of this state what their government is doing. So we have concerns about this bill and the broad exemptions that it creates to the Tennessee Public Records Act. We think the bill creates exemptions that would obscure the transparency of not just the economic development deals that might be taking place with the mega site, including how much money and the value of property actually granted to private companies, but the details of those deals and others that might happen later. The Tennessee Public Records Act was passed in 1957, and it's basically the machinery that assures access to public records. Even just in this committee earlier, I've heard information from references to the memo of understanding, to a proposed pilot agreement, information that the $675,000 was for 8 months, and there's estimates on what it would be after that, and running the authority. I want you to know that those records, that memo of understanding, that proposed pilot agreement, those are things that are not being released as public records right now. We learned about them because they were brought about here. Yet you are basically voting on this. The public doesn't have a right to see that. There's been a journalist who has requested some of that information. So when we talk about these new public records exemptions for the authority, I just put that out there in terms of the public records and access to public records is part of what builds in accountability for our government entities. So briefly, we had 3 main concerns about the bill, and they are in section 64.9.113. And we think they exempt core basic information that public and frankly lawmakers and also all the elected officials in those 2 counties who aren't serving on any board have a right to know about how the authority is operating. In 64.9.113B, a contract for a grant or other incentives like a pilot agreement would have to be, we assume, voted on in a public meeting by the mega sites authority's board of directors. But the details of that pilot agreement or any other agreement that's voted on by the board under this exemption in B could be kept secret prior to the vote and even after the vote if the agreement is not yet entered into or signed. That language was taken directly out of ECD's current exemptions, but they don't have a governing body that votes. We would oppose a governing body such as a mega sites authority's board of directors voting on an agreement when that agreement is basically confidential. It would be a public vote on secret details. And we think that flies in the face of the Open Meetings Act as well as the Public Records Act. We suggest that language be added that the contract or their agreement is open for public inspection at the time that it's presented to members of the governing body, before the vote. And that would be more in line with how IDBs work. That would be more in line with how county commissions and boards of aldermen's work when they're approving contracts like that. Probably the most troubling part of the bill is C 649113C, and it allows the CEO of the mega site authority to keep any public record of the authority confidential for 5 years if the CEO makes a determination that the record is sensitive and would harm the ability of the authority to do its job in that person's opinion. The bill does propose that the Attorney General has to agree and sign off on that. However, this discretionary authority for a government CEO to close records with little oversight is really disturbing. The CEO could decide, for example, that some details of the Ford agreement or some other agreement or any of the many of things that you guys have talked about today, which would normally generate public records, could be confidential and not release those. And 5 years is a long time to obscure or keep information confidential. And when the 5 years run out, do all the memos and records associated with that issue still exist? I mean, some of the main records will, but there are a lot of things that may have already been deleted. So I think it depends.
Ms. Fisher, if we could, if you
yeah.
could get you to wrap up your
Okay.
thoughts on this.
Third thing is the definition of proprietary information, which we're concerned about, that allows a company to decide what financial information would give a competitor an advantage. And there's nothing in this area that would prevent a company from asserting that any of the financial deals or grants or incentives that the government has given would be proprietary. And we've seen this happen with Google in Clarksville, where they told the IDB that the value of the property that they were being conveyed in the pilot should be confidential because that's proprietary information. We've seen companies be more aggressive on that. And if the government releases it, they would be liable to a lawsuit. So those are our main concerns. And thanks for letting me address you. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you for being here and thank you for sharing those concerns. Do we have any questions for Ms. Fisher? Any questions from our body? Seeing none. Wait, was that a beard scratch or was that a hand going? Okay, all right. You might have just bought a new car if we'd been in an auction. Oh, all right. Thank you, Ms. Fisher, and thank you for pointing those things out to us, and I do appreciate it. At this point in time, I will request if there's any conversations for the commissioners and from our Ms. Merrick, our capable legal staff. I have one question, and I think this kind of sums it up from where I sit. And I think you could probably tell by now that I have my concerns about the authority and what's going on in it. But then again, I love it. I promise, I love it. No, for those on live stream, we just had some type of rumble here inside our building that we're not real sure what it was. I would ask for the folks that negotiated this deal, and to Ms. Fisher's point, we don't have access to the memorandum of understanding. We don't understand what's in that document. But and I don't think that we could do the business of the state of Tennessee if we had 132 people negotiating such a memorandum of understanding. But the makeup of this board and the powers given to it through this legislation, was this mandated in this form by Ford Motor Company, or was this the Lee administration's attempt to provide the performance to meet what was included in the memorandum of understanding? I guess that's my point is is this y'all's work? Or was it given to you as part of the deal during the deal-making process? That would be my question, because if it's your work, that leads us to, that,
Let him start.
that gives me a whole different perspective. But if you would, whoever wants to take that one, I would
Let's
appreciate
let
it.
Commissioner Roth start with that
All right,
answer.
So,
and then-
Bobby Rolfe with ECD. Okay. So the memorandum of understanding really defined the business terms of the transaction. As part of that memorandum of understanding, we have appendix and addendums that talk about the actual lease agreement, the pilot agreement, and the accountability agreement. And what we want to make sure that all Tennesseans understand is we don't, while we negotiate those agreements, once they have been negotiated, they are presented to the various, I think the state building commission will be signing off. We have sought the Attorney General's input. We have had third-party counsel help us with all of those agreements. And at ECD, when the agreements are signed, they are posted, there's open access, and there are, quote, no secrets whatsoever when it comes to the business of ECD. What I think the concern is at ECD goes back to the Amazon deal. And so there were numerous stakeholders who were interested in all the details, all the conversation between Governor Haslam and myself and our team and those kinds of things, how we came up with our formularies to recruit them. And so, yes, that is one project where we did seek the Attorney General's opinion to lock down what we'll call marketing collateral and all of our private conversations that were part of those negotiations. In this case, we've asked for that same protection, only because a lot of that information we certainly don't want in the hands of our competing states and other competing companies. So that was some history there. With respect to the MOU, we, again, with Ford Motor Company, had proposed an agile body that Ford Motor Company could work with. And again, it was to streamline the entire process, whether it's roads, whether it's TCAT, whether it's the infrastructure, whether it's water and sewer services, whether it's the ED capital grant. So that's really where our conversations with Ford landed. With respect to some of the nuances of the specific language, we did not actually go to the great details to think through thoughtfully exactly the nuances of this potential board. And so I'll defer to the governor's team and their legal counsel.
Yes, Erin Merrick again. Good afternoon, Chairman. Commissioner is right in that the MOU and the nature of the deal that was negotiated was the basis with which we drafted the legislation. So this is, to make sure I understand your question correctly, this was by no means a situation where some attorney at Ford sent us some language and said, this is exactly what your legislation needs to look like. It was not that environment. The environment is that after ECD's extensive negotiations, those set a background against which we drafted this legislation to make sure that the state and the authority had all the powers that it needed to do what the state's obligations would be under this MOU, and also to meet Ford's expectations as far as how the state would operate nimbly and quickly, which was one of their largest selling points.
Mr. Chairman, I just
Yes, sir, Commissioner Ely.
Well, just to put an exclamation point on that, one of the things that I think that you've heard from both Aaron and Commissioner, I mean, what we sought to do on this was nothing additional than what ECD's normal process has been in the past with the other with the other clients or people that we've done these structured MOUs with. And so I think once knowing the things that they just brought out, what we also said is, let's stay within the confines of how we've done business in the past. And that's what this represents that is before you today.
And maybe if I could, Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
one
sir.
more point of context, and thank you, Commissioner Ely. So historically, we would not go through the efforts of an MOU. I think the last MOU was maybe LG Electronics and or Hankook and or maybe Nokia and Tire. And these were very complicated transactions. 99% of our projects don't go through an MOU that defines the business points. ECD simply negotiates with the company, and we use the same template every time. And so we follow our own series of guidelines. This one, because it had so many nuances and because Ford Motor Company was in such a hurry, because it's a state asset, because it's $1 billion of state appropriation dollars, that's how we got to that small body that would hopefully be able to transact business with the counterparty.
Right. The reason that I was asking that is, let's just take example, Ms. Fisher's testimony. Locking down open records for 5 years. I just was trying to figure out, was that Ford asking for that, or is that the governor's administration
Right.
proposing that?
Neither, sir. That would be ECD, sir. That it was just, we felt it was so proprietary. And again, it's all the nuances of the negotiations. But what I can promise you is that there is no, we are trying to protect how we transact business vis-a-vis the competition. And so again, as we said at the outset, this was really a 15-state horse race. And so it's those kinds of collateral, marketing collateral, and give and take that we'd ask for that proprietary information to remain quiet, certainly for this 5-year term. And again, the only other opportunity, and we have done, I can say, I've been involved in 500 or 600 of these projects since being at ECD that our team has been a part of. And rarely, if ever, do we ask for this kind of information. And again, think of it as the marketing, the negotiating, it's all the back and forth. And just here's an example. That MOU, I think we put our pencils down that Monday night before the announcement, and it was iteration number 38. That's how many rounds we had gone back and forth with in negotiating. Now, the great news about this MOU that we're talking about is, ladies and gentlemen, it's all of about 14 pages. So it's not like this is going to be the secret sauce to the globe. At the same time, it does identify business points so that when we now move forward, again, we didn't sign anything only because you have not legislated and provided the authority for us and the financial resources for us to move forward. So that's why we don't have any signed documents. Now, have we done our best to negotiate and make sure that the state is protected? We have done that, but we will only move forward after you approve the legislation before you and those funding mechanisms for us at ECD to go about the capital grant for the $500 million. Now, again, Ford did want assurances. You know, there's a great exit there, and they want assurances that we would add a second exit. And so that's TDOT's fairway. So TDOT's been working with them on creating those assurances. And again, no binding promises other than this is an understanding of a best efforts from TDOT. We've got the TCAT, again, that's not binding. That is our best efforts that the General Assembly will fund, in this case, a $40 million TCAT facility. And then, of course, all of the infrastructure that's wrapped around general services. And again, those, again, are best efforts and only will turn into contracts if and when you appropriate the dollars required to execute those contracts.
Yes, sir. I understand that. And the fact that an additional exit is needed at this interchange when we see that type of construction or this large construction site and those type things, that'll be an asset for all the citizens of the state of Tennessee, not just us. So that kind of thing doesn't really bother me. It really doesn't. That's part of doing business and part of transacting business. And what the thing that's just kind of, it's kind of one of those things that You ever eat cornbread and you kind of suck it down the wrong hole and you start coughing and you just never can get comfortable? That's kind of that's where I am on this authority board. I love the deal. I love the fact that Ford is going to bring new technology to us. It's going to change the outlook for people throughout, particularly our region. By the way, Collierville, Tennessee is on 34 minutes. I tracked it the other day from the exit. But the things that have been outlined in here, I think even in y'all's minds, you'd have to admit are pretty extraordinary. And I would ask you, is the 5 years contemplated for sealing records the initial 5 years or a 5 rolling year period? Is that how you see it, or is it just for the initial 5 years?
I can only speak, sir, to ECD and the marketing and the negotiating of the business deal. I cannot speak, unfortunately, for the state and the attorneys that are working on behalf of Governor Lee's office.
All right. Thanks, sir.
Aaron Merrick again, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your question. I wanted to provide some additional context about this public records language. This language is not something that's new. It's not something that we made out of whole cloth. It's not something that we made for this deal in particular. This is substantively identical to language that already exists in other parts of code regarding ECD records. And it made sense in this case to treat like things as like for all the reasons that Commissioner Roth explained earlier. With respect to the 5-year option to keep certain highly confidential things confidential, I was speaking with the General Counsel of ECD about that particular provision and how it's been used in the past. And she notified me that in her 10 years of serving in that role, there have been 2, maybe 3 instances where ECD has requested something like that. And then it goes to a review process with the Attorney General, which I've discussed with them as well, and which I understand to be very robust. So it is a 5-year period. There's not language in here that discusses a renewing of that 5 years. We've used it very minimally in the past, and this is a standard operating procedure that has existed for some time in this state with respect to this type of records.
All right, thank you. And I have something to say about that, but we'll let that slide for now. My last question, though, has to do with the structure of the pilot payments. We've got, as you know, there's I guess, Haywood and Fayette County. How is the payments in lieu of taxes, will that go to the county? That would be my question. And how is that monitored?
Yes, sir. So again, Bobby Rolfe with ECD. The traditional pilot program is a local opportunity to provide incentives. And for the sake of this conversation, these 4,100 acres have generated 0 revenue to the state, or in this case, I think 250 acres are in Fayette County, and the balance are in Haywood County. So that's the backdrop of how the local communities and what the communities do to be competitive to recruit business to their community is they take what would be the normal taxes, assessed value taxes on the tax rolls, and then they basically discount those payments and give that company what I'll just call a payment in lieu of tax break. And so in this case, the locals provided a pilot program for us to present to Ford Motor Company. And we negotiated what we think is a better deal for the local community. And again, in a traditional pilot program, it's the community where the assets are developed and built out that take the advantage. They negotiate the pilot, and then they receive those partial payments. And in this case, those partial payments would historically go for school system improvements or sidewalks or other infrastructure, EMT. I can just think of all of the requirements for the community. So that is what we've negotiated with Ford Motor Company. And the beauty is it's not only an escalating amount over the next 30 years, the sum total of $269 million, but it also has a whole host of clawback provisions. And I'm just going to, without taking you putting you to sleep, I can just simply say to you, in this case, for example, if in year 15, Ford Motor Company has not continued to employ 80% of the number of 5,760, they not only pay that annual pilot amount, but they pay a surtax, if you will, or a penalty. And then we have provisions in here if Ford Motor Company, for a 3-year period, for example, does not employ at least 50% of what they promised, the state has the ability to terminate that pilot. And you're going to say, well, what does that mean? As soon as you terminate that pilot, then those assets, $5.6 billion, end up on the tax rolls, in this case, because these assets are being built in Haywood County. And then it's Haywood County's opportunity to make their appropriate assessments and generate, obviously, a significant tax bill on an annual basis. So I think what you're asking is, because I have processed this many times over, the assets for this project all reside in Haywood County. As I said, there are a couple of 100 acres that are in Fayette County. So any improvements made in Fayette County, one would argue that pilot program, those dollars would go there. At the same time, I'm very mindful of the challenges of not only Haywood County, but the adjacent counties and the needs that they're going to be experiencing as they all expand and grow.
Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you for answering that. Does anyone else have a question for our witnesses? Because they have been very patient with us. They have been very thoughtful, and we appreciate that very much. So what we'd like to do is get those questions out to them, and then so that we can go back into session and conclude our conversation amongst us. All righty, we do have a few. Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, you mentioned earlier the relationships between S&K and Ford. The joint venture has not been formed, but with the MOU now that's in place, although you haven't signed off on anything until we pass the legislation. So is the MOU with Ford exclusively, or does that include S&K in the MOU?
Yes, sir. So Representative Miller, Bobby Rolfe again at ECD. The short answer is the way we've negotiated this particular transaction had challenges because it wasn't just the state and Ford Motor Company. Ford Motor Company has the right to take down the entire $500 million. They have the sole right to do that. And should they do that, they will be on the hook for an accountability agreement for the 5,760 jobs. They will be responsible for the payment of those pilot payments made over the next 30 years. So that's one extreme scenario, sir. In that case, Ford Motor Company does have the option to take down all of that money. And again, they have to deliver the number of jobs, commit the capital expenditure amounts, et cetera. That's one extreme. Because we're talking about a joint venture that really has not been truly negotiated, we've left open the door that the joint venture, now the joint venture is going to likely have, Ford's going to have probably 50% of the joint venture, but for the sake of the conversation, on the other extreme, if the joint venture does not commit to spend $800 million or more for their portion, then they're going to be limited to only accessing $75 million of that capital grant. Now, I'm getting way in the weeds, and you're going to say, Bobby, what in the heck are you talking about? But again, these were protective measures that we put in place because we didn't want the joint venture to show up at the window and take down all the money and own the project. We really were focused on Ford Motor Company. I'm not sure that's going to give you the comfort you're looking for. I can just tell you that that is part of these ongoing negotiations.
Mr. Chairman, just a follow-up on that. Do you anticipate a signed agreement, joint venture, that would not disrupt and or create a pitfall for the deal? In other words, what if we pass this, there's not a joint venture, then S&K and Ford gets together. Now they are negotiating to the point of they could end up 50-50. Is there any possibility that through their negotiations, they come back and say, look, we need an additional $100 million.
No, sir.
Based on
No,
our-
No, sir. We put our pencils down in that negotiation. You're asking the right question. Does we open up exposure? No, sir. But I can promise you this. We were focused on landing Ford Motor Company as an OEM. That was the big prize. This joint venture is not noise. It's certainly important. It's $2.5 billion of capital. It's probably of the 5,700 jobs, approximately 2,500 jobs. I mean, it's very important to the success of the OEM. But we spent all of our energy negotiating with Ford Motor Company, and then that's what took some time to think through all of these one-offs that you're bringing up. But I can promise you, we again engage the best counsel to protect the state to make sure that there's not a gotcha moment, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Griffey,
Thank you,
you're
Mr.
recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner Roth, Commissioner Ely, and Ms. Merrick. Thank you. Just a couple of questions. If you can share with us, who did y'all employ for outside counsel? And is it fair to say that the point of having this oversight board is to try to sort of boil down and consolidate the functions of all the various state agencies that have to be involved with doing a major project like this, and also the county thing, and boil it down to a finite, small, nimble number of folks that can meet and make decisions quickly to meet the needs of Ford Motor Company?
Yes, sir. So Representative Bobby Rothkin at ECD, the short answer is we engaged the Bradley Law Firm. And we engaged the Bradley Law Firm because that seemed to be who represented everybody that was on the counterparty on all the other transactions that we had worked on. There are 3 or 4 fabulous law firms that are very focused on this. It just happened to be that we engaged Bradley. And so they did help us. They helped our general counsel. We have a general counsel and a legal team inside of ECD, but needless to say, as good as they are, and they are the best, could not grasp the magnitude of this project. So Bradley was very, very instrumental in helping us. They also helped us with some of the modeling of the language, some of the protections that would be their fingerprints on some of those protections. Now, again, but going back to the basic documents, the accountability agreement, that is our state, our ECD, the lease agreement, they were certainly very instrumental in helping us with. Now, at the end of the day, yes, sir, this was one of Ford Motor Company's big issues. They thought there are so many moving pieces, they're in such a hurry, and they create the nuances of a joint venture and all of those, they were looking to make sure that the state of Tennessee put forth its very best effort. And I'll go back to that earlier comment that Bill Ford told Governor Lee and Bobby Roth that we were head and shoulders ahead of everybody. And that's a heck of a statement that you guys deserve to have, because you put the policies in place to make us a successful state. And so that's some of the background behind this. It was not in a way to cut out or limit. It was a way to be agile and hopefully have the right people. And I say that ECD, look, I'm not looking for another role to serve on another board, sir, I promise you. At the same time, ECD is going to be recruiting another 12 to 15 suppliers. General Services, we wanted them on the board because General Services has a $150 or $60 million build out. General Services has to provide water and wastewater, and there were no more options. You understand about TDOT, about the roads. And the great news about that TDOT road that has been softly designed is it's not just another exit off-ramp to the site. It's connecting a couple of great state highways to think thoughtfully about the traffic of the future. So that's why, and then of course, at the end of the day, we needed F&A and we needed Commissioner Ely, because Commissioner Ely really is going to help us with a lot of what we'll just call the funding mechanisms, and certainly the importance of what he represents in his office.
If I may just follow up, and
Yes, sir.
lastly, on the confidentiality issue, let me ask you if it's fair to say, it's kind of analogy, the Titans won 34-31 against the Bills last night. Tennessee is in competition with Alabama, Mississippi, North Carolina, Kentucky, everybody like that. if we don't have this confidentiality provision in place, we're kind of giving up the Titans playbook to everybody else in the NFL when we get ready to go up against another match the next weekend. Was that, would you
Yes, sir.
comment on
Again,
that,
Bobby
please?
Rolfe. And yes, sir, that's exactly, that's a very relevant point. And so while we don't have what I'll call super special trade secrets, how we go about recruiting and some of the nuances and how we go about negotiating these transactions, there's a lot of give and take. And if you open it up, which, you know, if the Attorney General says open it up, we're going to do that. But we are really trying to protect what I'll call Tennessee's recruiting sauce.
Thank you, sir. Representative Bricken, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm going to stay on that open records issue because I'm somewhat confused with this bill, which authorizes the creation of the authority and its business. I don't see why the records of ECD or TDOT or anything else would be open to the public under this legislation. I mean, this legislation deals with the functioning of the authority. So it just seems like we're restricting the public information to authorities' records, and the authority is got a clear format for what it's doing. All the negotiations have already been done. That's not business of the authority. That's already done. So why not amend the open records like any other industrial board's open record rules?
Yes, sir. I'm going to turn this over to the attorneys. I can just simply say, with respect to ECD, that's what we are focused on. That's our lane, and we are just simply interested in keeping our marketing records. I'm going to defer to the governor's office.
Erin Merrick, again, Representative, thank you for your question. So I want to start with the premise that is also stated in the legislation that the records start is open. That's our starting point unless there is an exception that is applied. So I don't want that to get lost in our discussion of particular nuances of confidentiality. So the baseline is openness here, as it is with all of our other departments and agencies. The documents and such that ECD is going to be working on with respect to this deal and negotiations and working on projects for other partners to come to the mega site is inextricably intertwined from the work that the authority is going to be doing with respect to managing that mega site in so many ways. And so in the normal course of affairs, we think it's highly likely that some of those ECD documents, which are presented in the hands of ECD, could also end up in the hands of the chief executive officer of the authority or others who are doing a lot of the management work to get this done. And so it doesn't make sense for a record, the same thing, to be confidential in one place and not confidential somewhere else. And another thing that I'd like to point out about items that the board itself will be voting on. So the board meetings and the board votes are subject to the full force of the Open Meetings Act, which we've laid out in the legislation as well. And so implicit in that is the same type of notice and public access to the meeting materials that are going to be discussed at the board meeting. So it's implicit in that open meetings access that the things that the board is going to be voting on are going to be open for all comers who are in attendance and watching that meeting.
Can I follow up on that? Again, I know we're creating kind of a super board, but I'm just go back to a county industrial board, and TDEX keeps their secrets pretty tight. And again, so from a county industrial board, nothing ever gets released until usually ever. Well, I won't say that, but I just don't understand why we're putting this public records restrictions in this authority when we don't have it in most counties' industrial boards. TDEC keeps their secrets, and I'm not asking them to divulge their secrets and negotiations or marketing or anything like that. But all actions of the authority itself in their dealings with doing their business, I think has the right of public and view. And I don't think the CEO should be able to arbitrarily send something into the abyss and for 5 years. It just seems like we're putting a lot of extra restrictions on this body that we're not doing other places.
So, as I mentioned a moment ago, the board meetings are subject to the Open Meetings Act, which covers what I think is that primary concern of the board taking action in secret. That's not something that would be occurring here because of that opens meeting protection that we have. As far as the counties and municipalities and other groups that are doing these sorts of development, there are comparable statutes that deal with certain types of public records protections in those areas. But because of the interaction between this authority and ECD, we were of the opinion that it just made the most sense to choose as our mirroring statute the language that you all have enacted regarding the ECD records.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Chairman White.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just going to make an analogy, and I hope I'm on point, maybe help the committee. I had a business before I came up here, I had a business for 20 years. And I still wake up in cold sweats at night thinking how hard it was to keep that business going for those years, 24-hour days sometimes. After about 10, 15 years, we built up a competitive edge because we had to work and figure out what it was like to beat the competition. And I would think in the Department of ECD, y'all trying to build up a competitive edge against the other 49 states or the other 14 in this case. So we would work hard, and after 14, 15 years of our business, we built up a pretty good competitive edge. Well, I'd have people come along, and sometimes they'll be wanting to start their own business, which is great. But they would say, well, where did you get that product from? And I say, it took me 15 years to figure that out. And so my point being, if ECD is working to have a competitive edge on how to attract industry to Tennessee, I would assume that it would be great that we don't divulge all that right now when everybody else is out trying to get. Would that be a fair analogy?
Yes, sir. And as we all know, every project, this one was ultra competitive, but today every project is competitive. And so your analogy would be accurate. And so that's why we are so protective of, again, our secret selling sauce. I know that sounds a bit silly, but at the same time, the results we are so proud of. And the last thing we want the world to know is we don't want Georgia knowing what we're doing. We don't want Kentucky, basically the contiguous states here. That's why that we are so protective, if you will, of our selling practices and sauces, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. If you've been in the business world, you just got to do that because it's very, very hard to build a business and beat your competition. Thank you.
But with all due respect, I don't think it's the harboring of ECD's secret selling sauce that's giving us any heartburn. I think it's the closing of records of a yet to be established board is what's giving us concerns before we've ever even seen them operate. That's at least that's my perspective. I want ECD to continue to do the great job that they're doing. Representative Parkinson, you got something to share with us?
I do. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're recognized.
Commissioner Roth, and thank you. And again, and Commissioner and Counselor, thank you. And by the way, you're an amazing talent. I have to give it to the governor for having you on this team.
Thank you.
Yeah, you can sell ice cubes to anybody. So, that's a compliment. But I do have a question, Commissioner. You did mention that this is a state asset, and we're a diverse state, and there are many stakeholders in the state and taxpayers. And I do need to know if there was anything, and maybe you can answer this, Commissioner, if there was anything in the negotiations that laid out some provisions to ensure that everyone had a fair shot at benefiting from this big deal that we're doing here in Shelby County. Of course, I want it in Shelby County, but in the state of Tennessee, namely women, being able to contract people of color, being able to contract and being part of, being able to benefit from the onset of this big deal that we're all of us are sinking 1 billion of our diverse population tax dollars into.
Commissioner was chief negotiator there on this, and so
Yes,
I'll
sir.
let you
So thank you,
respond to that.
Commissioner Ely. The short answer here, sir, is the MOU does not address the requirement for Ford Motor Company and/or their joint venture to use certain, I think, women, diversity, and other businesses across Tennessee. So we don't have that protective language. At the same time, I've gotten to know, our team have really gotten to know this company well. And what you just spoke to, sir, is exactly what's important to Ford Motor Company. And I'm going to share with you the reason I know that. The product that they've chosen to invest in our state is this F-Series. The F-Series is about a $45 billion brand to this great company. To just put it in perspective, that alone would be a Fortune 50 company, just the Ford F-Series. Ford Motor Company is so tied in, so sensitive to all of their customers and how they treat their suppliers and their interest in making sure that they engage with the local community. And when I say local community, I'm talking from Jackson to the local asset at the MRM to Memphis, Tennessee. So they probably are more attuned, sensitized to making sure that the local community and the local businesses not only enjoy their fair share of business, but are successful, because success breeds success. And like I said to you, as much as we love where the mega site is, had Memphis, Tennessee not been within a 30-mile radius, they wouldn't be coming to our state. And I can just promise you, knowing the company and the partnership that we've created, they will be ultra sensitive and ultra mindful of making sure that all of these small to medium-sized businesses are considered, and hopefully will be not only taking part in the construction, but providing all of the ongoing ancillary services for the next 50 years, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, clarification. And Commissioner, while I appreciate you, that does not is not gonna bode well with people that I represent, because Ford may not be the problem, but Tennessee is the problem. And when you look at the track record of how minority businesses and women-owned businesses are faring when it comes to being part of the process, we have a dismal track record. And here we have an outlay of 1 billion of their dollars, and then the proximity to Memphis and Shelby County, you hit the nail on the head. Here you have a population in the city that's approximately 70+% African American, and there are those businesses, and yet the business outlay for those that are even in that city is dismal. And so I don't know what the solution is, because I understand the importance of making this as open as possible for Ford to come in. I get that, without putting any restrictions on, just like I wouldn't want to see any restrictions on union labor being involved, so if Ford so choose to, which they tend to, and which I think is part of I think is good for Ford also. But I don't know how we ensure that the diversity of Tennessee is being represented at the table, because what's going to happen with this deal is somebody's and maybe, obviously several somebodies are going to become, are going to create generational wealth off this one deal, you know, for many generations in their households. But what's been happening is, you know, a lot of women have not been able to do that same thing, and a lot of people of color have not been able to do that same thing. So what it boils down to, there will be a lot of white males that create generational wealth for their families, and we want everyone to be able to benefit from their tax dollars, you know, on this big deal, because it's everybody's tax dollars that are being outlaid. And I don't know how we get to that, though.
Yes, sir. If I could just maybe.
Well, I might like to editorialize is that's Representative Parkinson's perspective. I don't know that is shared by everybody from this committee. So just keep that in mind, Commissioner.
Okay, let me clarify.
We've had clarification enough.
Yes, sir. If I could just close to respond. Again, this is a partnership, sir. I know this company. We know them well. And what you're talking about is just as important to Ford Motor Company, and that's making sure that everybody enjoys this prosperity. At the same time, you mentioned the demographics of the city of Memphis. The great news about the kinds of jobs that are going to be 30 minutes away are going to be targeting Memphians to come to that site and enjoy those great wages that is going to raise their prosperity outlook. And I'm talking about significant wages that are available, that are going to be available, but maybe are not available in the city of Memphis, sir. And the great news is they are such family wages that will certainly bring anybody that chooses to come from, whether it's Memphis or Jackson or anywhere in between, to work. There will be outstanding economics for those people. And like I said, my closing thoughts are, we trust Ford Motor Company to make sure that everybody is successful. And that's not just certainly for one set of business people.
And thank you, Commissioner. And my numbers come from the state. For the chairman, for the record, so you know, there's your clarification. My numbers come from the state, not from my own head. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Commissioner.
Yes, sir.
We're going to go to Representative Miller, and then we're going to finish up with Representative Todd, who has a question for Ms. Fisher. But right now, Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Commissioner, just to follow up, this will not call for any changes in the MOU. It will not cost any money and/or legislation, but would you consider, based on the conversation with Representative Parkinson, every 6 months or annually, pretty much giving a report of the number of women, minorities across the board? And again, that doesn't cost anything. But my question concerning the board, will the board have an office in Haywood County or on the grounds of?
I think that they will. I mean, I don't think that's been finalized, you know, but it's practical that they do. As I mentioned earlier, as we look forward to the TCAT being there on site, I think it makes sense to probably put a presence there. And so I would think, in all practical terms, yes.
Okay.
I mean, so we should.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Lambeth, we're going to Representative Todd. And first off, let me say to our witnesses, y'all have done a great job today. We appreciate you spending time with us, shedding some light on this issue, and we appreciate your patience with us. And thank you. And y'all can go do the great things that y'all do every day. So we appreciate it very much. And Ms. Fisher, if you could come answer some questions from Representative Todd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate Ms. Fisher being here today and expressing the concerns of her organization and herself before this committee. And I don't want her to think that we take what she said very lightly, because we don't. This is certainly, and I think as you can see from the follow-up questions and comments, that we don't take it lightly. These things are a concern to us as well. I know, and just, I guess, I'm not telling you something you don't know, but obviously the people of this state elect our governor,
every 4 years, and the people of this state elect members of this body every 2 years, and the Senate every 4 years. And so they have a certain say-so in state government as a result of that. And knowing that, and knowing that we have oversight through the various mechanisms of the legislature, I'm hoping that that gives some, based on what we've already heard about the reasoning behind some of the trade secrets and the secret sauces, that can give some level of confidence that certain things may have to be kept secret. But with the oversight that's built in here with the Attorney General, with the legislature, does that, as this has been fleshed out a little bit, does that give you some more comfort, not necessarily 100% comfort, but more comfort with the concerns you expressed earlier?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I have heard some things such as the documents being available at the governing body meeting before the governing body meeting. I thought I might clip that in a video to keep that. But I am concerned about what actually gets written into the law. Because if ECD or the authority were interested in keeping the secret sauce, confidential, that's what would have been written into this. That's not what it says. You can get an exemption, a narrow exemption for their playbook. That's not what it says. It just says a public record, including proprietary information. So while I do appreciate the intentions of the governor and of this body, when it comes down to it, the statute is what controls when you're in this situation. So that's why I wanted to address the body. But I do appreciate that you have listened and given me a chance to bring the concerns forward and your support. Thank you.
Well, and we appreciate you being here and bringing this, as I said previously. And I think with the mechanisms that are here, with the AG overseeing this and having to give authority to hold certain things in secret, it gives me some more concern. Not concern, but more comfort, and I think alleviates some concern that I've had on it, because that was a flag to me as well when I read through this. So I'm after the conversation here and understanding a little more about this, plus the oversight the legislature will have, and in addition, I think the Senate has has an amendment that has been put on that changes the makeup of the board so that the legislature has even more representation. If we mimic that or do something even better, then I think that gives us all even more comfort that your elected representatives that are closest to you are going to have direct oversight and input, because we would then be able to remove those members of the board if they're acting outside of what the intent of this is. So I'm hoping that can help alleviate concerns, still protect the secret sauce, but alleviate the concerns. So thank you again for bringing what you have today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much for being here. And we're going to now go back into session. We got any closing remarks from our sponsor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And in closing, I'll stand before you today and thank each one of you. Chairman, thank you for your insight and the questions from all the committee members. And I appreciate the time of the commissioners and legal to clarify. And hopefully your answers have put you at ease and made you feel good about this legislation and the impact it will have on communities across Tennessee. Again, I thank you for your time. I thank you for your questions. And on behalf of my community, the surrounding communities, and communities across the state that will benefit from this historic investment, I'll ask for your support on this legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Committee, we've been talking about this today, and honestly, if this were presented, I would struggle with this matter if it were not bundled into the mega site deal, the package the way that it is, because frankly, I think that this body, this mega site authority needs more work done on it. I think that there's some issues that can go. But frankly, whenever you don't have any leverage, because on the one hand, I share some administrative concerns about a board that is yet to be constructed, yet the opportunity in the other hand is so big and so massive and so opportunistic for so many people across not just West Tennessee, but in the entire region, that I feel like I have no leverage. And whenever you can't say no to something and walk away, you're really not negotiating. And that's the position I feel like I'm in today, is that this, on one hand, the mega site deal, what it can do for families that frankly have not had many opportunities. For those of you who are not from West Tennessee, there's limited opportunities. There really is. And what this will do, this gives opportunities to people of every color, people of every economic strata. It's going to be good for a very large number of people. And as I sit here and find myself looking at a bureaucratic board, sitting here picking at it about things that frankly I would do differently, it's kind of like saying, am I not going to eat that carrot cake because it doesn't have pecans in the icing? I still love carrot cake. Would I prefer it to have pecans in it? Yeah, I would. But if it doesn't, I'm still going to eat it. And that's kind of the way I am about this mega site deal and this mega site board, because it's not great. The fashion that it came to us in was not great. But frankly, the end product and the ends that it's trying to reach is a very great thing. And so I don't know how each of you are going to be voting on this. I always ask you to vote your conscience, but I'm gonna keep my eye on the prize, and I'm gonna keep what's happening there off the exit around Stanton and see what it can become for an entire portion of our state. And I'm gonna vote for this thing. Well, I've had one. I'd already recognized somebody. Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My beard caress has turned into some contemplation and turned into another question. And you led to another question, and I'll ask this of Leader Lamberth because of his vast background, not only here, but in the legal realm. Is there anything in this that we're voting on that would prevent this legislature from going back and changing things about this authority later on? Does it set in motion something that we just can't change?
Thank you, Representative Todd. Leader Lamberth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and great question. No, absolutely not. I mean, we meet every year for a reason, and this, I hope, will be a journey that we take, not with one company, but with multiple different companies that will join with us in a shared investment in West Tennessee. I mean, this is what is necessary today to get this ball rolling, because there is zero investment there now and zero jobs there now and zero taxes being paid to the locals. And what we have is an opportunity for exponential growth there. But as that growth comes, I hope that all of these questions continue to be addressed. And there is nothing in here that cannot be changed. The contracts that are signed, even, as the commissioner said, can be amended as time goes by and other joint partners come in. This all is subject to continual discussion within the legislature. I will say that I hope that the basic tenets of this we stick with, because that is a promise to Ford or SK or anybody else that comes into this state, that we would not drastically change this agreement once they have invested billions of their hard-earned dollars. I mean, it is a private company, but all of this can be changed at any point.
Thank you, sir. That may or may not have crossed my mind as well. Representative Brickens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I agree with your remarks that this bill is probably 98, 99% a great piece of legislation. But I'd never understood it could not be tweaked or changed, or it was the bill as presented in its entirety. For a piece of legislation that we all only, at least I only saw last night, I'm surprised that we only have one or two amendments. It almost seems like several amendments would have flushed out by now. So, but maybe I'm still new to the process. But I guess the question is, I mean, between there, I mean, if this committee votes for this legislation between there and tomorrow when we vote on it, is there still opportunities? I mean, if there are going to be amendments to the floor, if someone feels strong enough to do anything, is that the appropriate vehicle?
Yes, sir, it is. And I'll say this, Representative Brickens, we had members contemplate amendments. The reason that I asked them the pointed question of was this bill considered in the MOU was because I didn't want for us to sit up here and inadvertently amend something out and screw up, or excuse me, mess up the deal. I'm aware that there are a few amendments having to do with things that are being discussed, and I think the administration is aware of these negotiations that have to do with housekeeping things more so than anything that have to do with the tenets of the deal. But I would tell every member here is that the House rules as adopted for this extraordinary session are still in play. That if someone does not see this bill coming to the House floor in the shape that they feel passionate about it, that they can offer up a thoughtful amendment to it. I think what this chair's desire to do for today is for us to pass it out and put it into the hands of Finance, Ways, and Means. Let them address their concerns. If they feel that there's an amendment that is being discussed between our colleagues and the Senate colleagues and the administration, that hopefully it would show up there. And if there's something that is a problem for someone between now and tomorrow, let's keep our eyes peeled on that. And if we need to add a floor, if you feel the need to add a floor amendment, then you absolutely have the right to do that. And again, I think though the point that Chairman Todd and Leader Lambert brought up is one that frankly I did think about, was that while this seems to have been presented to us in a manner in which gave it leverage, it will not be the same in January. Ford Motor Company will have received the reassurances that the state legislature is behind this project and is trying to give them the best opportunity to succeed in our state that it can. If between now and then we feel like there's opportunities to improve that chance for success, then I would think that we would come in and be looking at amending this and working on this structure at that point in time. But I think that the administration's concern and ECD's concern is that we signal to Ford Motor Company that the state of Tennessee and the elected leaders of the state of Tennessee want to do business with them. And I think that we all agree that that's something that's a similar signal that we want to send. And that if we need to work on our deal, as long as it doesn't basically violate any of the primary tenets of it, because what I heard from these folks today is that this is ECD and the administration's bill. This is not Ford's bill. So we can open that back up. Let's send the signal we need to send. And I think there's no doubt that folks understand what our concerns with regards to this project moving forward, whether it's the makeup of the board, whether it's the contracting vehicles that they use, whether it's incentive for minority or women-owned businesses, whatever those issues are, we have the chance to continue to reiterate that to them. And for that, if there's nothing else, we've got the motion. The motion is on the floor. It's in the proper posture, and it is to send House Bill 8001 as amended to Finance, Ways, and Means. Is there anyone have a problem with calling the question?
Mr. Chair,
Representative Miller.
I think I properly filed a couple of amendments to this bill, did I not?
Yes, sir. They were not timely filed, but if you would like to have them considered by this committee, I thought we had got that worked out with the conversation we had previously about the fact that we would probably see similar amendments in front of Finance.
Mr. Chairman, my understanding between the two of us, I will discuss the bill, at least bring it up. And the fact that they were not timely filed is absolutely, respectfully not true. But I was going to withdraw the bills, but I wanted to have an opportunity to at least talk about them.
That was the part that I did not understand, Ms. Representative Miller, but please do so at this point in time. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The First Amendment 9955 simply would expand the authority.
Leader Lamberth.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize. I was not provided a copy of the amendments. If I could, thank you. I just merely wanted to follow along. Just as a sponsor of the bill, I was kind of curious what amendments have been filed since they were not timely filed. And I think it's because we took a break. I think that's the discussion, but I think I've got them now. Somebody just handed me something.
Excuse me, and I may be incorrect about the nature of the timeliness of it, because I do see a drafting code on the bottom of it.
Thank you, Mr.
Whether
Chairman.
timely or not, that's between you gentlemen. I just wanted a copy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I mean, it's no big deal. They were timely filed. I passed this out. You have a code. So there's a motion and I got a second.
We're good. We're good then. Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Code 009955 would simply expand the board from 7 to 11 members, 2 members from the Senate and 2 members from the House of Representatives. Now, the opposition that I've gotten on this has come this way in 2 forms. It makes the board too political. That's what I've heard. And I've never understood that rationale. It makes it too political. What do you think we even hear? I mean, come on. And the other reason is that we're looking for experts on this board. And then I think about that. In defense of my legislative colleagues, we have some of the best lawyers in the General Assembly. We have some of the best engineers, bankers, doctors, blue-collar workers, you name them. We represent the General Assembly. But to tell us we're not skillful enough to add elected officials on this board is almost insulting and offensive. But with that, Mr. Chairman, and I understand there are some negotiations and we will continue to discuss these things. And with that, I will withdraw this amendment.
Without objection. Hold on, we got a second. We have a second. We have another amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that. 009954. Mr. Chairman, do you have a copy of this amendment?
Yes, sir. We've got it.
This amendment simply says that, and we're not talking about the 7 members that are appointed, especially not the 3 members, the commissioners, but the other remaining members that are appointed by the governor and the speakers must be confirmed by a majority of the House and the Senate. That's all this amendment would do, Mr. Chairman. And based on our conversation, again, there are some ongoing discussions in possibly Finance, Ways and Means, and even maybe in the Senate, So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will withdraw this amendment.
Without objection, the amendment is withdrawn. And let me address something you said, Representative Miller. I tend to agree with you with regards to the fact that if we give someone who has been duly elected a chance to participate in a process, people run and jump to this conclusion that they will suddenly become overly political, whenever indeed those are the only people who the general public have an opportunity to express any redress over. And so whenever I hear that, whether it be with a health board needs to be constituted by only those who are unelected to, as you were discussing this, is that at least with the people that are sitting here on this dais, we face the scrutiny of the voters every 2 years. And if someone has a problem with what we're doing, they have an opportunity to exercise their right for redress. And so I wanted to let you know that. We've had one final question, request for question prior to calling the question by Chairman Powers for Leader Lamberth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Leader Lamberth, I brought up a question a while ago when we had the commissioners here, and it really wasn't answered. So I just want to know if maybe you could answer it, or you could tell me where I could go get that answer. One of the first things that that Ford would have done before they came here or before they looked at this. They would have looked at, what is the break-even point? How many years will it take for this site to pay back, or how many that investment that they're making to pay back? And they would also looked at the return on investment, whether it's 10%, 50%, 80 or whatever. And so I asked the commissioners that, and I never did really get an answer from them. So I was just wondering, I know somebody's probably got the answer to this because they've done a lot of work on it and y'all have had to look at it. So I just wanted to know, that's all I was looking for, the return on investment, the percentage that we're looking at, and then the number of years to take it pay back. And that way, when we convey it back to our constituents and we're talking to them, hey, this is going to pay itself back. And then after that, we're clearing money, we're making money after that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and great question. In fact, it was one of the very first questions that I asked of the governor's office. Of course, the bills were filed last Friday, but even before that, in discussing with the governor's office what this might look like, and we're working with our legal staff and fiscal review, approximately 15 years would be for the $500 million, the ECD shared investment. It's $178 million during the construction phase, because even materials that are purchased out of state and here, they're paying sales tax on that. You have F&E tax, additional sales tax, and I think to the tune of about $22 million a year after that. So when you kind of do the math out, you're talking roughly 15 years. Now, what the commissioner was getting to earlier, that's literally just the base. Because after 15 years, obviously that investment has come in. That doesn't include hotels, restaurants, stores, houses, everything else that's going to be built around this area. That's literally just direct sales tax dollars that are coming back to the state of Tennessee of the people's money. So our return on investment after about 15 years, and again, it's a little bit one way or the other, but approximately that amount of time is when we can consider an investment, return on that investment where we're at least not only just break even, but then above and beyond that. Now, the hard infrastructure that's invested in the area, the water and sewer and roads, that is quite frankly, I hope investments that we would have been making somewhere in Tennessee anyways.
Right.
We're making it in this area because we have a large company and they're joining with another company to invest in that area. But we would have been investing in roads and water and others in other areas anyways. Many of those areas already had some infrastructure, but that's hard infrastructure. So the return on investment I'm talking about is really on the $500 million, which is the ECD portion of this.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Powers. I want to bring up one other point of information for the committee, that Representative Harris had also filed an amendment with regards to the authority being subject to auditing by the comptroller's office. And what I'd like to do is ask legal to provide us that, because I think everybody would feel better knowing that that is indeed part of the process. And we believe that it's already covered through existing statutes. And so if you would.
Sure. Matt Mundy from Legal for the Record. Currently, right now, the comptroller does audit all of the entities that are in sunset review as part of the process of sunsetting those entities. Every time they come up for review, they have access to confidential records. They can't disclose those publicly or to GOC, but they do use those confidential records as well as public records for purposes of conducting a performance audit. I spoke to the comptroller's office in between our meetings, and they confirmed that the comptroller himself has wide latitude in terms of the scope of the audits that they do on these entities that they sunset.
And so, given the fact that this amendment was also timely filed, Representative Harris, would you like to withdraw it, or would you like to?
Yeah, I'll withdraw.
All righty. Thank you, sir. We appreciate it. Without objection, this amendment is also withdrawn. All right, folks, we've heard a lot. We've got a question on the bill as amended to send it on to House Finance Ways and Means. All those in favor of doing so, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none. It's off to Finance Ways and Means. Thank you for your work and service today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
And we are going to adjourn this committee subject to the call of the chair.